I can only imagine when that day comes, when I find myself standing in the sun. I can only imagine when all I would do is forever worship you. I can only imagine.
Hi, my name is Steven Sindoni. Thank you for tuning in to The Road Less Traveled. Here in part 3 of the series, I will share with you my teen years. It was during these next several years that I became the conscious observer of all of my experiences and those around me. The death of my grandparents and the untimely divorce of my parents forced me to develop a totally different vantage point than any of my friends. The world as I had once known it had now totally changed. And as I share this once painful experience, I can see it now as a benefit and not an adversity in the saga of my life. Here now are the events of my life as I recall them. It was now the mid-1960s. My mother had moved my brother and I to a new neighborhood. Everything had now changed. I would find myself going to the cemetery and visiting my grandparents on a regular basis. I was trying to figure out the reason for losing the two most influential people in my life. Looking back at it now, I was privileged to have been a part of their lives and they a part of mine. I spent quite a bit of time in silence, and this is where I began to listen to the voice from within. Some call it their inner voice, some call it their higher selves. There are many descriptions for this phenomenon, and I'll call it the inner voice of reason. It was the late 1960s and the civil rights movement was now in place. A young Dr. Martin Luther King was preaching racial equality. It was a time when there was a racial tension in every city in America. I could never comprehend how anyone could detest another person because of his or her skin color. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a political activist and Southern Baptist minister. He was one of the greatest speakers in United States history. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Had a Dream speech delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. was heartfelt. Despite the tensions, the march was a resounding success. More than 250,000 people of diverse ethnicities attended the event, which led to him being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. Then on April 4th, 1968, I heard the second shot that was heard round the world. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the black American civil rights leader, was assassinated. He was now dead. He was shot in the neck while standing on a hotel balcony with the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and then he dies at a local Memphis, Tennessee hospital. I can only ask myself, why was another great leader gunned down? Why? I was still too young to understand. And then not long after, Dr. Martin Luther King's good friend, Bobby Kennedy, was assassinated by Sirhan B. Sirhan in the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. Questions are still being asked today concerning Sirhan's motive and whether he was part of a conspiracy are mired in controversy to this day. As I recount my story, the 1960s were a very controversial and turbulent time in America. But on the flip side, the year 1969 had a great deal of memorable events. Neil Armstrong was the first man to walk on the moon. Shortly thereafter, in August, there was Woodstock, a memorable musical event. An event that I had numerous opportunities to buy tickets and I had rides to get there. But for some unknown reason, I chose not to. But while all of my friends were at Woodstock, I met a new girl. Her name was Debbie. So I guess I did know the reason why I didn't go. If I can use a sports analogy here from baseball, some of the best trades are the ones that aren't made. And some of the best decisions you'll ever make in your life are the ones to stand pat and the ones that you don't make. In 1969 had a couple other memorable events. Joe Willie Namath of the New York Jets defeated the Goliath Johnny Unitas of the Baltimore Colts to win the Super Bowl. We even had a horrific weather and hurricane, Camille, to contend with. Then on May 4th, 1970, I heard the fourth shot that was heard round the world. I had just turned 17 in March, so now I was fully able to understand. And then I read the newspaper headlines that read, America kills its children. Students came out of the Kent State campus and scores of others to protest the bombing of Cambodia. Some rocks were thrown, some windows were broken, and an attempt was made to burn the ROTC building. Governor James Rhodes sent in the National Guard. Many students were injured or killed in protest of this unpopular war. The public was now in an uproar. The United States government was forced to go to a military lottery draft. Then in the following year, in March of 1971, I received by mail my United States draft card, and shortly thereafter I was sent a letter to report for a physical. After completing the physical, I was given a status of 1A, which meant I would be the first one to go to war. But growing up in Brooklyn gave me a lot of experience to see war on the streets. I had first-hand knowledge. There were many nights that I heard gunshots fired. There was a war going on in the streets. It was called poverty. There were no silver spoons in my neighborhood. All of the spoons were tarnished. I watched a lot of my friends get drafted and go off to fight a war in Vietnam, some returning in pine boxes while others coming home either wounded or drug addicts. I asked a few of those returning what did they learn in their experiences in Vietnam. I was told that the war wasn't about communism and fighting the Viet Cong. It was about guarding the poppy fields. It was about the drugs, the opium. It was about drugs. I was now beginning to connect the dots. Is this why John F. Kennedy was killed and why Lyndon Baines Johnson then, after Kennedy's death, sent in thousands of troops into Vietnam? I believe it is in June of 1971 that I was in the first military lottery. I remember going down to the newsstand and picking up a newspaper to find out what numbers had been called. I remember jumping up for joy. I was elated. My number was not chosen. I dodged a bullet. Many of my friends weren't so lucky. Looking back at it now, I don't think luck had anything to do with it. It just wasn't in my paradigm. I did not believe in war. I did not believe that killing another human being would settle any differences or create solutions to diplomatic affairs, nor do I believe it now. I will be forever indebted to all those valiant souls who lost their lives in Kent State and Ohio on that fatal day, and all those who lost their lives in the senseless war in Vietnam. And I'd like to close here by saying I think that all politicians should have to send their sons and daughters to battle first. I think it is now their turn to start guarding the poppy fields. I'd like to thank everyone for watching The Road Less Traveled, Part 3.
I can only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. I can only imagine